Hi, it's Richard here from Necktop Training. In this video, I'm going to run you through the common structure and workings of an internet business application. But before I start, let me clarify what that means exactly. It is important. By business application, we mean an integrated suite of software that aligns with and aids the execution of business processes. Now, those processes may be accounting, sales, supply chain, quoting and booking, sales analysis, workflow and scheduling, etc., etc. The list as long as is your imagination. The application may be accessed by staff internal to the business, by business partners, or by the general public. By internet business application, we refer to the structure and deployment of such an application. Specifically, we mean this. 1. The software lives, or as we say, hosted on the internet and is not required to be loaded on any user device. 2. The application can be accessed at any time from anywhere in the world by any authorized and secured user. 3. The application is accessed by a HTTP or HTTPS domain or subdomain. 4. The software is written such that it can be hosted by one or more servers anywhere in the world. This may be in the operating company's office, a public data center, or with any internet hosting services provider in the cloud. Today's business internet applications are the core of any business's operations when it comes to things IT. They make it easy for customers, partners and stakeholders to self-serve, which of course greatly reduce the costs of running a business. In this unit, the executive level, we have a close look at how internet applications work and how they're developed. So stand by and we'll walk you through all the moving parts of a typical internet business application. So let's take a close look at an internet business application and pull it apart and see what all the pieces are and how it all fits together. So to start with, we have our users. Now, our users would use maybe a PC in the office or a desktop or a laptop, or the public, maybe probably going to be using a mobile, or if you've got mobile reps, they'd be using a mobile. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. You just simply require a device. It can be anywhere in the world. There's no limits on where it is. It just simply doesn't matter. It can be used from anywhere. On the other side, we have a server, and the server is a much more powerful computer in a data center. Now, that could be in our own business office. It could be in the local internet host. It could be on the other side of the world. Again, it really doesn't matter where it is, because the client and the server are connected using the World Wide Web. And the World Wide Web, of course, is a protocol of the internet. So that's how we managed to get this sort of always available, always on worldwide connection set up. Now, why this type of application is so good and so cost effective for business is because the users do not need anything installed on their computer. The client merely runs an internet browser like Internet Explorer, or Mozilla Firefox, or Chrome, or Safari, or whatever, which is already going to be on this device of theirs. So we don't have to do anything, and they don't have to do anything to install our application. Our application lives on the server, and all our code lives and runs here. So the whole support, installation, maintenance costs are just cut down to an absolute minimum, because we have everything on this server available to us, and we can control it with minimum effort and the clients or the users need nothing on their device. Now, we're going to be looking at two different programming languages. One of them is called HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. It's the code that internet browsers read in order to know how to format a page. HTML defines what's on the page, what the page looks like, what the next page to go to is, and what the previous page it came from was. HTML, you need to have a rough understanding of it and how it works, but you don't need to write it. And the reason you don't need to write it is because in practice we always generate it on a visual basis, as we'll see later as we go along. Now the other language is the one that runs on the server. We're going to be using PHP in our course because it's free. You don't have to pay for it. It's very simple and easy to learn, and as such it makes a great candidate for a course. In the commercial world there are lots of alternatives to PHP. I've just cited a couple of them here. Python is very popular, and then the more conventional languages like Java and C are more popular, and there's a whole host of others too, which I won't go into. Again, the thing about PHP is it's simple and easy to get, and it's easy to teach with. And the thing about programming languages is that once you know one, it's very easy to pick up others. So if your goal in life is to be a Python programmer, fine, but starting with PHP is no problem because you'll find it easy to pick up later on if you want to go to another language. So HTML runs on your device under the control of your browser, and PHP or Python or whatever runs on the server. Now, I said that HTML doesn't really have to be handwritten. You rarely write the code. The reason for that is that there's many what we call WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Design tools allow you to lay out things on a visual basis, and then when you press a button it'll convert it into all the HTML code to display and render that page. It is important to note that HTML code, it lives on the server, not on the client. It runs on the client, but it lives on the server. When you type in a web address into your browser, www.something.something, what happens is that the browser goes to the server defined by that web address, and it locates the code to run from there, and that code is then brought back down to the client and run on the client. Now PHP, it has a whole different role. To put it simply, it implements business rules. You know, it works out things, it calculates things, it moves data around, it manipulates data. It contains the operational rules of your business and implements them in code. The PHP code has to be written out with a text editor. You don't generate it. And that means that learning it requires that you need to learn all the syntax and special words and, operators and constructs, which is largely what this course is all about. PHP code lives on the server and it runs on the server. It never gets anywhere near the client. So what I'm going to do here is just take this apart a little bit more. I'm going to show you what happens when you request and process a web page. And I'm going to break it into two sections. I'm going to show you what happens on the client device and then what happens on the server computer. So to kick the ball off rolling, the user on their client device, on their browser, enters a URL, like, for example, www.necktop.com/HLT. So when you then click the button on that, the browser contacts the web server. Which web server? Well, it knows that from the name, www.necktop.com. necktop.com, because there's a huge great directory sitting out there in the web that tells what computer runs each of those domain names. So it contacts that web server, and that web server running on that data center or whatever is probably going to be running one of two web server software products, Apache or IIS. Apache being overwhelmingly the more common one. Anyway, it doesn't matter what the web server is, they basically work the same way. The first thing they have to do is go to their script repository. That's where all the files of script or files of programs are kept, and it has to locate the script that corresponds to the address that you've supplied. Okay, so what happens then? It goes to the script repository and it finds the script that matches this website. So the first thing that happens is that it passes it to a piece of software called the Common Gateway Interface, or CGI for short. And the function of this thing is to determine what, if anything, has to be done to this script file before sending it back to the browser on the client PC. So the first thing it will do is test if it needs PHP or Python or any of those other language components in order to run this script. If it doesn't need any of those things, that is, it's probably just plain HTML code, as it would be, say, in a home page before you get to enter anything, then the file is simply sent straight out to the output stream, which is the stream of HTML that goes back to the client. So in other words, nothing happens, it pulls the script, sends it back to the client. However, if it does detect that there's PHP or some other language component in there, then it has to then call PHP to execute all the PHP instructions that may be embedded in that file. And it does that by looking for all the PHP code, removing it from the script, executing it, and if the execution creates output, that output is put into the output stream as well. That sounds like a mouthful, but what I'm really saying here is that the output would typically be maybe some data off a database relating to a client or a product. So the PHP script may be go and get that customer, find his name and address and date of birth and all that stuff, and put those things into the page so that they can be displayed when the output is sent back to the client. So when either the execution of PHP or other language elements are complete, or nothing was needed anyway and it's just plain HTML, the output stream of HTML is then sent back to the client, to the browser, and the browser simply looks at all that HTML code and it uses it to render a page with a display, like this one we're seeing here. And it's pretty clear that this page has got data in it, little small, I know, but it's got things like you know, an email address and a customer name and a list of all the attractions that this tour will visit and what kind of lunch they're having and what the pickup address is and what the pickup time is. And all those things have been embedded into that form by PHP statements on the server. So that's an important diagram. So I do encourage you to go over that a few times later when you get the chance, just to sort of put it all in perspective. Because in this course, what we're really focusing on is how to write this part of it to make it into a business application. Okay. Let's have a look. Let's work through a very, very simple example using the simplest possible form that we can imagine, just to sort of make sure we understand how it all ticks. So you don't have to understand this code. It's HTML and it's generated by a generator. What it does is it renders an incredibly simple page. And on that page, if you look here, it says HTML test form. That's the heading, that's the title. It will say that on the form. And somewhere else on the form, there's an input field, which is called first name, and it's given a value of blank. There is no value. but this is important. Value equals is a HTML phrase that tells you what the value of that field to display is. So when the browser renders that, this is what it's going to look like. You remember you saw the title, HTML test form. This is just our browser here. And you'll see it has a field called first name, and it's blank. There's nothing in there. All right, what we're going to do is show you how the server would put a value in there and send the result back to the client. So we do that by embedding PHP statements into our HTML code. And a PHP statement is a tag in HTML, and we'll learn later what that really means. But suffice it to say that the code of PHP that has to be run is included in these tags, which is less than a question mark PHP and ended by question mark greater than. So all this says is, look, set up a variable or a code or a name that's called first name, and its value is Tom. Now later on in the HTML code, let's look where we looked before on the last screen. Remember it said value equals blank. Well, what we're going to do now is put in another PHP statement introduced by the PHP tag, and the statement is echo first name. Echo, by the way, is a PHP word or command that means write into the output stream. So all that's going to happen here is that whereas before we had value equals blank, it's going to come out the other end, value equals first name. And first name is Tom, so it's going to say value equals Tom, if you follow that. So first, PHP removes the first tag, and it stores the value Tom in first name, and it gets rid of it from the code. So we don't need it to go back to the server. Then the next thing it has to do is deal with the second PHP statement, which is this one here. And it executes that, removes the statement, PHP statement, and replaces it with the result of executing it, which is Tom. So we've got the value Tom in our first name field. And when we then get that output, which is now just pure HTML, sent back to the browser, that's what it looks like. It's the same, it's just that it has Tom in the first name field. So simple example, I know, but try to relate that back to simple idea of a request page, the first page, going to the server. Server goes to the database, finds the customer Tom or whatever that is, puts it back in the page, and then sends it back to the client to be rendered. So while we're on the subject of PHP, we mentioned it executes business rules. Well, what sort of business rules? What do we mean by that? What does PHP do? Probably the most important single thing that PHP does in the real world is it accesses data or a database. So if you've got a file of customers or a database of customers, someone logs on, say, and identifies themselves, we need to then get PHP to go to the database and check that that user or that customer's identity and get their name and other data. If we're going to write a page that, say, asks for a quote, gets the customer to put in details of what their tour is and where it's going to go and how long it's going to last and how many people there are and what kind of lunch they want and so on and so on, then all of those things have got to be collected from a screen and then maybe stored on a file or database somewhere, because we want a record, obviously, of all the quotes that we've given. So accessing data and writing data back and just generally managing data and databases is probably the main job that PHP does. It also has to manipulate data. A good example of manipulating data is preparing a quote. We've got all those variables that I just mentioned. What we want is turn them into a dollar value that says this is how much it's going to cost. So, it's always going to be manipulating data and calculating. Sending emails and messages, also super important. If you're going to do a quote, you've got to send it to the customer, haven't you? You've got to formalize it and document it. The best way to do that is to send an email or an SMS message. Another thing that we'll touch on when we get to the more advanced parts of the course is that one of the main jobs PHP does is to generate HTML code. Think of a table. Let's say that a user or an agent is logged on and they want a list of bookings for a particular client, or a list of quotes for a particular client, or both. And they probably want them arranged in a table so that one line is, one quote in the table. Well, the easiest way you can possibly do that is just get your PHP to read from the database all of those quotes that you want to show, and then for each one, create some HTML that will format a line with individual boxes and lines and shadings. Maybe have alternate rows in slightly different colors and all sorts of fancy things like that. And it might want to sort them in a particular order. It might want to highlight ones that have some exception or whatever. So all of that requires generating HTML code, which is one reason why it's a good idea to have a fair idea of what HTML is and how it works, even if you never actually write it. And most of the communication of PHP back to the client is based on substituting values in the HTML code with values that are a result of carrying out the instructions in PHP. That is exactly what we did in that little example where we put Tom in the input field. We substituted some PHP code with an actual value that was the result of carrying out that code.